It's no secret that Brooks has a signature sound, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you hear it in his track Boomerang, in his Work From Home remix, in Bite, in Jet Lag. Okay, you get the idea. Before we get into FL Studio, I want to focus on what makes up the Brooks sound. First of all, the leads, that distinctive EDM lead you hear in all his tracks. The sound is created by layering several lead patches to create one thick sound. It also has a certain reverb setup, which is controlled by a peak controller, and I'll explain how to do this later on. Secondly, the bass. It should come as no surprise that the bass also contains many layers, but it's important that each layer is meaningful and adds something to the sound, rather than just layering for the sake of it. And if this sounds confusing and abstract, it'll make sense later. Finally, the drums. Brooks uses a lot of percussion that fits the rhythm of the leads to create a strong groove, and almost make the drums blend with the lead to create one enormous sound. It's important that you get this groove right to achieve the Brooks style. There are many other techniques that Brooks uses to make his music stand out, and I'll explain all of them as I go along. So before I get started, do consider subscribing to stay updated on all my future content. As I record this, we are really close to 100 subscribers. Let's see if we can get there. Okay, let's start with the leads. This is what they sound like all together. And there are a few things I want to talk about here, starting with this first lead. So we've got two oscillators here, a basic mini with the wavetable position set to 0, and a rounded saw with the wavetable position set to 15. The basic this oscillator has the unison set to 10 and the detune turned slightly down. This one has the unison set to 6 and also the detune turned slightly down. Now this envelope has been shaped like a pluck with quite a fast initial decay and a short release. So that's what this sounds like. We've also got this LFO, which is shaped like this, and this is controlling a whole bunch of things, but we'll talk about that later. There's also a noise oscillator here, and this is the glass lid attack, and it sounds like this on its own. And what this is going to do is just add a bit more punch to the sound each time it hits. This LFO is also controlling a filter, and oscillator A, oscillator B, and the noise are all going through this filter, so that's what this sounds like. This LFO is also controlling the level of the noise and the level of both of these oscillators. Now moving on to the effects, we've got a bit of hyperdimension with the size turned down and the mix set to around 15%. We've got a bit of distortion in the tube style, bit of chorus, and finally a compressor. This is just adding punch to the high end and gluing the whole sound together. Now moving on to the next lead, which I've actually made in silence 1. First I'm going to turn the voices up to 8 to get a thicker sound. Now you might think this is a completely normal saw wave, which it is until I do this. I'm going to set this to pitch A and B, turn up the decay slightly and turn this knob down. And you get this. You can hear the synth gliding up to hit each of the notes. If I were to turn this the other way, we get another familiar sound. But if I turn it down, the synth glides up to each of the notes that we hear. And this is an important part of the Brooks sound. Now for the third layer of the leads. Now this is actually a square pluck from the Young Style Ultimate Future Bounce Pack, and I'll leave a link to where you can download this in the description, but I'll show it to you anyway. So the main oscillator is a square wave with the octave set to +2. There's also a noise oscillator with the bright white noise preset. And the level of this is being controlled by this envelope right here. There's also a second oscillator which is set to the octave +1, but because the level is decreased on this one, we don't hear as much of it. This is what it sounds like with this oscillator turned off. and then with it turned on. The final layer is another lead preset from the Youngstyle Future Bounce pack, and it's being routed to the volume of this noise oscillator, which sounds like this. Both oscillators are set to high unison values, and the level of this second oscillator is being controlled by the envelope. In terms of effects, we've got a bit of distortion with the Diode 1 preset set to about 30% mix. We've got a bit of hyperdimension with the size turned down slightly and the mix turned down. We've got a phaser, which is definitely adding something to the sound. If I just turn it off here, this is what it sounds like. And then I turn it on. So we've got a phaser here, which doesn't make that much difference to the sound. If we turn it off, we get this. Turn it on again, we get this. And finally an EQ, which is just a high-pass filter as far as I can tell. So that's it for the leads, except it isn't, because I need to show you the effects of all of them put together. This is the leads bus. This is the channel where I've routed all the leads in this track, so I can apply effects to them as a whole. And it starts with this EQ, which removes this frequency, which I found annoying. And then on the second EQ, we remove all frequencies below 300 Hz and slightly boost the 1500 Hz range. Then we've got some sidechain. This is what it sounds like with the sidechain off, and then with the sidechain on. Now for the reverb that I talked about earlier. This is a peak controller, and what this does is just measure the audio peaks in a track. So as you can see, we've set it up like this, so that the peaking is taking up roughly a quarter of the dynamic range that we can see here. Then, on your reverb, you want to go to Wet and click Link to Controller. Then choose Peak Control and set the mapping formula to Inverted. Then press Accept, and then you'll see that the peak controller is controlling the wet level of the reverb in this really funky, unique sounding effect that keeps the leads clean. That's it for the leads, now let's move on to the bass. To start with, we've got two noise presets. This one is an air can with the envelope shaped like a really short pluck, and that sounds like this. And then this next one is a kick attack, which sounds like this. Together they sound like this. And I did this just to add some extra impact to the bass. Now for the bass shot. Now this is basic shapes, and this is a square wave which has been modified by setting the wavetable position to 5. I've shaped the envelope like this and the LFO like this. The LFO is controlling the cutoff of a low 12 filter, which sounds like this. The unison of this oscillator is set to 11, and the detune is set slightly down. I know there are many people who swear by putting all their bass in mono, and I would agree for sub-bass, but I think it's okay to get some extra stereo fields with these mid-bass frequencies. Now for the main bass. This is the crispy preset from the Ultimate Future Bounce pack. And it's being layered with a few modifications of the same sound. I've EQ'd each of these individually so that each preset is covering a different area of the frequency spectrum. You can see we've got an analog sine preset here, which is going to FM from B on this oscillator, which has 7 voices and detune slightly turned down. Finally, this envelope. Finally, this envelope. This is going to the filter cutoff over here. And you can adjust this until it sounds right to you. Now, all of these basses are going to the bass bus channel right here. And the first thing we have in the plugin chain is some side chain. Then we've got some EQ, cutting out the high frequencies and boosting the 1500 and 300 Hz ranges. It's also cutting out some very low frequencies, as we're going to use the sub to fill that space. Then we've just got a compressor to glue all of these different sounds together and make them sound like one enormous sound. And so all together we get this. And together with the leads, this sounds like this. Another thing I want to talk about here are these Broth Stabs. Now, the topic of how to make these is for a whole other video, but one thing I want to show you is the way that I've sidechained these to the reverb. Because I've put reverb on here, I want that reverb to be sidechained, but I don't want the Broth Stabs to be sidechained themselves. So what I've done is I've automated the mix level of the sidechain so that it only comes on once these Broth Stabs have finished playing, and that sounds like this. Finally, in the category of bass, we've got these growls. Now what I've done is I've taken these bass growls and sliced them up and then pitched them to create the rhythm. Finally, the drums. First of all, I've got this kick going. And sidechained to this kick is this white noise. I've also got a downlifter and some drop claps. Now, you know what I said earlier about little percussion shots fitting to the rhythm of the lead? Well, this is it. If you listen to the rhythm of the lead and these percussions, this is what it sounds like. This helps to add a strong groove to the track, as I mentioned earlier. We've also got these EDM percussion shots, and together with the kick and clap, it sounds like this. Now this is a bit crushed clap from Nicky Romero's sound pack, which is on splice.com, and you can use any bit crushed clap for this. It's just a really nice sound that Brooks has used in many of his tracks. So altogether, the drums sound like this. And you can hear that the beat is a bit more detailed than your average EDM beat, and this is an amazing technique that Brooks uses to make his tracks more interesting and stand out. Okay, thanks for watching the video. I tried to reply to as many comments as I can, but if you want to ask me a question, the best way to reach me is at my Twitter handle, @DJMaximizeMusic. Also email djmaximizemusic@gmail.com for ghost production inquiries. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.